Pharmaceutical and biotech stocks have taken hits this week between uncertainties surrounding the president's plans for broad tariffs and staff cuts, the Department of Health and Human Services affecting the FDA, CDC, and more. Our next guest says these cuts could be devastating for institutional knowledge at the department. Dr. Zeke Emanuel is the University of Pennsylvania's Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, also working under President Biden and President Obama. Dr. Emanuel, great to have you in here. You say the notion that this is an effort for efficiency is false. Explain.
Well, if you look at the cuts, 20,000 people is the cut being proposed at HHS, actually being implemented as we speak at HHS. And that is purported to save $1.8 billion. If you just figure what's the salaries and benefits for 20,000 people, it turns out it's about $1.8 billion, which tells you very clearly there are no efficiencies being gained because they're not anticipating reducing the budget. I would also mention that the $1.8 billion in savings supposed is 0.01% of the HHS budget. It is not serious. On the other hand, the people you're cutting are the people who've been there a long time, who understand how programs work, understand where the best investments are, who the best researchers are, where we can actually improve the country's healthcare system. Look, one of the areas we're cutting is chronic illness. RFK claims that chronic illness is one of his top priorities, and yet we're undercutting our ability to fight things like hypertension, diabetes, and obesity, and intervene also on chronic infectious diseases. This is not the prescription for making America healthy again.
Dr. Emanuel, sort of related to that, what do you think are the biggest risks to Americans from some of the cuts that we're seeing? Is there any sort of urgent risk that could be incurred from these cuts?
Well, you're looking at a big measles outbreak with a large percentage of the people kids contracting measles, being hospitalized, 2 deaths, and it's spreading. That's one immediate risk. There are other, we just had a cruise ship with norovirus. There's other risks that are more midterm. Those are risks of uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled hypertension, and other chronic illnesses. And then there's the long term. You just got heard. There are drugs and therapies that we won't discover. There are also going to be slow approvals at the FDA. You get rid of something like over 3,000 people at the FDA looking at drugs and vaccines and other things, and you are going to slow up that process, which means it'll take longer to evaluate new products, and that is going to make it much later for Americans to get therapies. The last thing I would say is there's been a wholesale attack on mRNA, because it's associated with Tony Fauci, even though the president created warp speed and did a great job, actually, of fast-tracking that vaccine. But mRNA is not being used just for vaccines against infectious diseases like COVID or flu.
Yeah.
We're talking about mRNA vaccines against cancers. So
Right.
you may be able to treat your cancer with a shot rather than chemotherapy in the future. We're just not going to pursue that. That is devastating to the country.
And Dr. Emanuel, I know that you are obviously very familiar with this up close, given your work during the COVID-19 pandemic. What happens if we get another pandemic and all of our health officials have been fired?
Well, it's not just our officials, it's whether we'll actually know, because the monitoring systems that we've had in place, the local and state public health boards, the funding for that is being pulled. We may walk into it blind, not know what we're doing, and not being able to control it. And I think this is a serious issue, especially since we have H5N1 percolating out there, and we really need to track it carefully to sequence all the genomes so that we know if it's evolving and potentially transforming. But that's not the only serious infectious disease out there. COVID came out of nowhere, and we know that there are many other illnesses that could threaten the country.
Certainly. No, I think part of the stated purpose or the stated goal of this administration generally, not just in healthcare, is to get the private sector to take on some of the things that the public sector has been doing, that the government has been doing, funding research, for example. Is there a place here for corporations to step in to do, at least fund some of this research, if not do some of these other functions?
That just misunderstands the ecosystem of biomedical research. Look, a lot of basic biomedical research, like the Human Genome Project, like the development of gene therapies, like the development of CAR T therapies, that happens in labs funded by the government. Then it's brought to a collaboration between universities and private industry and the drug companies and the biopharmaceutical companies, where they further develop it, refine it, make adjustments, and then they test it in large numbers of people. Let's face it, the drug companies, I sometimes criticize them for not doing enough research, but they're doing a lot of research, billions, tens of billions of dollars of research themselves, mainly in the clinical sphere. They've sort of outsourced the basic science and the preclinical trials to university labs and startups. So there is already a lot of research, and they are not going to fund the basic research that happens at universities because it turns out to be a common good. It makes no financial sense if I, as a company, spend money where other companies can gain an advantage from my research. That's just not how it goes in the world. The ecosystem is such that universities do basic research, the drug companies come in to really do the clinical research and develop that drug and market that drug and distribute that drug and go through the complicated FDA process. That ecosystem, you take one leg out and it's going to fall down. And I think that was the warning of your prior guest. This has been the place the United States has been number one in for decades. And now we're totally the programs and policies recommended, the cutting of the research, the threat to university endowments are really going to undercut that lead that the United States has.
Yeah. Dr. Zeke Emanuel, thank you so much for your perspective. We'll be right back.
Thank you.